Jake, before I introduce you, what I'd like to do is take a few moments and speak to the why. Why Bitwise here today to present. Jake Soberal is the co-founder, which I know you're going to be very, very pleased to hear the story of their company and what they've been able to build over the last 8 years. I was introduced to them about 4 months ago. They originated in our region via El Paso. Many of you all know Woody Hunt, the Hunt Corporation, the Hunt Foundation. Woody Hunt actually invested in Bitwise as well and encouraged them to look at the southwest part of the United States, and that led them to El Paso. Bob Wingo encouraged them to look at Las Cruces as well. So they're actively in the El Paso community and the Las Cruces community as well. And what I'd like to say about this company, which one, it's an inspirational company. It's true social impact. It's the intersection of private enterprise, private equity, with working in a community spirit with the city, with the county, with stakeholders, the university, and they've been having meetings with all those stakeholders, is to move the needle and move the ball forward. And I think everyone in this room, all of us for years, have sat through brainstorming sessions and meetings and looking at how can we raise the bar on the employment and higher paying jobs, getting people out of poverty and doing better in life. And they've done it in Fresno, California. He'll tell the story. And they're doing it in other parts of the nation as well. And I'm really, really excited about what they're accomplishing, and I'm really hopeful that they will be able to put a stake in the ground here in Las Cruces. I mentioned Woody Hunt. They have raised to date, and I always, when you're looking from a private equity raise, good ideas, but not only good ideas, but results generate investment. They have raised over $100 million to date in private investment. JP Morgan, the Walton Family Foundation, the Pritzker Foundation, Mark Cuban, and I could go on, but a lot of other investors around the country. We have an investment group taking place right now in the region, El Paso and Las Cruces, to raise the necessary capital because they need that investment from local investors to show the commitment. Also the connection with the city and the county. We just had a great meeting with the city and the county officials just before this lunch. So hopefully more information will be coming out from that to show the connectivity with the city and the county as well. Davin's been doing a great job with his team on the economic incentives, not only the LEDA, the JTIP program, high wage job credit, so on and so forth. So that's taking place as well, and very exciting to see what comes out of that. I will say this, since we're at a large group here, and for the sake of time, Brad Beasley, who's working with me on this and facilitating and helping navigate the investment vehicle, all too many times when there's really cool projects that come into a community, it's kind of reserved for the few, right? What we see is the opportunity through crowdfunding, and Beto Perales, who Beto is at NMSU, if you all know Beto, creating a special purpose vehicle that allows individuals that might not otherwise be able to put up a large investment to be part of an investment fund, to be part of this from a community stakeholder standpoint. So we'll get more information on that as well through MVEDA, but that's a really exciting part because we sat down and talked and said, this is something that we don't need just to have a small few involved in this, but we can cut out a slice and have it to where it's a lot more opportunity for everybody on that. But anyway, more to come on that. So let me introduce the speaker, Jake Soberal. That's Jake on the screen. Jake, can you hear me? Can you wave? All right, so just gonna do a sound check. So Jake leads Bitwise Industries in vision casting, real estate development, and strategic initiatives. Jake grew up in Clovis, California with a dream of eventually holding national office, an aspiration that eventually turned into creating opportunity for folks of every walk of life. Jake, you made a great decision of prior to co-founding Bitwise, Jake practiced intellectual property law. In 2012, over drinks and aha moments with his client Irma Ogeen. Irma, who's also the co-founder, was here in town the last 3 days, El Paso and here. She was at the city and the county meeting, but she had to move to some other meetings and take a flight out of town. But over drinks with Irma, they excitedly discussed the possibility of a company that could nurture and network the critical components of Fresno's tech industry and become a driving force for the local economy. At that moment, the idea of Bitwise was born. Jake believes we all have gifts to contribute and an obligation to use them. He helped launch I Believe in Downtown, a grassroots campaign for the redevelopment of downtown Fresno and investment in Fulton Street. He is an advisory board member for the 59 Day of Code and sits on the board of the Downtown Fresno Partnership and Neighborhood Industries. Jake holds a dual degree in history and political science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a JD from Western State College of Law. He enjoys running, working in his yard, and most importantly, spending quality time with his family. What you heard about Jake, and a lot of us in this room that have served on different organizations, Downtown Partnership, Revitalization, Jake is one of us. So if you could connect Fresno and Las Cruces, there's a lot of kindred spirit between this community. So please welcome Jake Soberal.
Well, thank you so much, John. I now need a thumbs up from you all. Can you hear me? That's great. Well, I do feel like the stakes are a bit uneven today in that you all had to wear pants. But nonetheless, I am really delighted to be able to share with you guys. We do have several colleagues that have been spending the last couple of days there in town. And I'll echo what John shared in that so much of what we're encountering in Las Cruces is familiar. The warmth, the grit, the care for your town and your region is really heartening and something that we are truly, truly excited about. Excited to share with you all today and really tell from the beginning the story of Bitwise, because it's a story that we think is important, but certainly also because it's a representative story of the sorts of things that are possible in towns like ours. We like to begin the story of Bitwise with a glimpse into our hometown and the lived experience of Irma and I. We think it's the best way to understand the heart behind the work. So Irma and I grew up in Fresno, California. Fresno, if you are not familiar, is in every way except for mileage a lot closer to Las Cruces than it is to San Francisco or Los Angeles. It is a heartland America city, and it is truly a place that has been underserved and underestimated for as long as we've been alive. Fresno produces about a quarter of the world's table food, so it's an agricultural community. And today, too much of what people do is dependent upon whether their grandfather worked on the farm or owned the farm. Both Irma and I are the children of Mexican immigrants. And so our story falls very squarely into that latter category. For my part, my father grew up in East Los Angeles. He joined the Marine Corps, and after coming back, he first generation, my grandmother came across the border while in labor so that my father could be born here in America. So after high school, my dad joins the Marine Corps. He comes back and he's working as a night watch security guard in Los Angeles. And while he is working that job, he has a particularly hard day, comes home from work and flips on the TV, and he sees a commercial for a thing called the Computer Learning Center. And what my dad remembers about that commercial is really three things. First is that the lady on the commercial was awfully pretty. The second was, it looks like that place has air conditioning, and I don't. And the third was, I bet a computer programmer makes a lot more money than I'm making. And that is the story of how my dad accidentally found his way into the technology industry. It ultimately served as an inflection point for not only his life, but the eventual lives of me and my siblings and the opportunity that we've been able to enjoy. For her part, Irma's family followed the crops. They actually came across the border in El Paso and they followed the crops to the San Joaquin Valley. Irma grew up, began working in the fields, rolling raisins at the age of 6. She grew up in a town just outside of Fresno called Carruthers, California. And her vision for her life was that she really would have made it if she could manage the local subway. But the story, of course, didn't go that way. Irma in high school heard an announcement over the loudspeaker that there would be a test. It ultimately was the PSAT, held in the cafeteria, and you could get out of class for half a day to take that test. And she was awfully interested in getting out of class, so she went and took the test, not knowing what would come of it. Of course, what came of it is that Irma scored extraordinarily well and became a National Merit Scholar and earned a full ride scholarship to the University of Toledo. Now she receives this letter, she takes it to her folks, and she's reading that she can go to college. Like, there's nothing standing in her way. This is a full tuition scholarship. Her parents had the really difficult task of looking back and saying, we don't have the money to get you there. We literally don't have the money for a plane ticket or a bus fare so that you can make it physically to that place. So Irma and her family did what scrappy people do. They recycled cans and bottles all summer to purchase a bus fare, and Irma rode a Greyhound bus from Fresno, California to the University of Toledo. And upon arriving, somebody asked her, well, hey, what's your major in the registration office? And Irma looks back at them and says, well, what's a major? She says, well, here's a catalog and go and look through it. Irma is flipping through the catalog, a kid from Fresno, California, where it rains once every 3 or 4 years. And she'd been back there for a couple of days, saw the storms were really exciting. And there was a brand new glass building on campus. And Irma said it would be awfully fun to take classes sitting inside of that building and looking out all this weather that's brand new to me. And of course, that was the College of Engineering. And that is the story of how Irma accidentally became a computer engineer, a career that ultimately changed her life and transformed circumstances for not just her, but for her family. As you heard with Irma and as you heard John mention with me, both Irma and I did what too many smart kids in Fresno do. You graduate high school and you find a way to leave. And after bouncing around the country for early education and career experience, Irma and I both made the decision, still not knowing one another, to come back, to return home. And really underlying both of our decisions was the belief that the most impactful versions of our futures was one lived out in service of our hometown, that we could really do something. And so we both came home, Irma an engineer and entrepreneur, me intellectual property attorney. And I was enterprising enough to realize that this 5'0" Latina from Carruthers, who's running all of the most exciting things touching the technology industry in Fresno, is somebody whose coattails I could probably ride an awfully long way. And so I sought her out and we became fast friends. I certainly became her attorney, but more importantly than that, we began to realize in one another a peer, a colleague, a friend that had this burning desire for a different sort of future in our hometown than people assumed was possible. And we just so happened to be working in and around the technology industry, which had this odd dynamic, right? The technology industry that we were seeing had this problem of it could not find talent fast enough to keep up with its needs. Here, on the other hand, we're living in a city that cannot find opportunity fast enough to serve its people. And so we sort of became curious, why couldn't these two problems become each other's solution? And we were young enough and dumb enough to think that we could fix everything. And so we began digging in around this idea of how could we use the technology industry to transform our city. And what was deeply important to us when we said that is that we weren't talking about other opportunities for folks that already had opportunities, but how could we take the most left out, the most underestimated in our community and build a reliable bridge into the opportunity that the technology industry is uniquely capable of offering, such that we could experience individual transformation, and that in their aggregate, these many people enjoying opportunity in the technology industry could actually transform our city. And so we set out to fill all of what we perceived as those gaps. And then as now, the work takes 3 parts. And I'll share that by way of both functionally what we're doing and then some stories that illustrate the importance of each of these component pieces. The first is what we call workforce training. We teach people the skills they need to access opportunity and technology. That began as computer programming and has expanded since to things like project management, design, entrepreneurship, Salesforce, and on and on. And that skills training is something that's being delivered in a project-based style, and folks are delivering real-world work products and things that are quite customary around the country and world in these boot camp settings. What makes us different from others is that we serve almost exclusively individuals coming from a story of systemic poverty or a historically disenfranchised community. And so what that meant to us is from the very earliest days is this understanding that JavaScript is not what's intimidating or stopping somebody living in poverty from becoming a computer programmer. Rather, it's going to be something much more like childcare or transportation or compensation during the period of learning or stable housing or food security. And so we said, if we can build a robust network of these resources that, if provided to students, would essentially have the effect of getting the world out of their way such that they could consume these skills, this skills training, we could unlock extraordinary brilliance in and for the technology industry in our hometown. Now, it didn't all come together elegantly. There was this moment at which we were partnered with West Hills Community College District, a rural community college that sits at the edge of Fresno County, around a program. The governor had just given us $3 million to stand up a really innovative program that was designed to train students to enter the technology industry while staying in Carruthers. And we get this $3 million grant, and the chancellor of West Hills Community College sort of calls me very sullen and says, we've got a problem. We surveyed the students and none of them have transportation reliable enough to get them to the facility in Fresno to learn the skills. And so sort of baffled, I said, well, you don't have vans? We don't have anything that we can do. And so I said, just hold right there. That was the day that we started our transportation services. We went out and bought 2 15-passenger vans, called Frank back and said, look out your window. We'd parked them right in front of his office and said, now we've got no problem in getting the students there. And so we've been very tactical in trying to see how can we meet the non-technical needs of these students to create that space in their lives. We began in a modest way. We taught 2 courses with 12 students in each in 2013. Irma taught one, and Matt Higley, still a computer programmer on our team today, taught the other. I think between the 24 students, about a dozen of them were cousins of Irma or mine. But the program really quickly took hold because of the outcomes that we were experiencing. And so that early progress in Fresno bubbled up to 5,000 students trained, over 80% earned technical employment. They were almost certainly the most diverse technology workforce being created anywhere in the United States. Most of those students came to us out of field, factory, restaurant, or retail work, making just less than $20,000 a year, and exited to technology employment making greater than $60,000 a year. So really extraordinary lift in terms of their economic attainment. So that workforce training piece of the puzzle is certainly one of 3 components of Bitwise, but I'd encourage you to think of it as the driver of everything that we do. The second thing that we do is called technology consulting. We build technology solutions for customers around the country and world. About half of our customers are in government, about half are in the private sector. And we tend to do similar work to an Infosys or a Cognizant. What is fundamentally different about us, though, is that substantially all of our technical talent is hired directly out of our workforce training programs. What that does is it gives us an infinitely scalable workforce that is accessed by virtue of our investing in talent that others simply won't and don't. We were recently interviewed for a national publication where they said, "Are you having trouble recruiting?" And we said, "No, we're having no trouble at all recruiting. In fact, nobody is endeavoring to recruit the students from the populations and places that we are, and so we're able to recruit in a green space." And so that certainly drives our ability to scale. But then what we knew would happen is that by doing extraordinary work, say for the state of New Mexico, the state of New Mexico might see, well, gosh, where'd you get this talent that delivered this wonderful work product? And we're able to point to our workforce programs and make the state of New Mexico think differently about what its hiring practices and hiring out of non-traditional programs. And so our work in technology consulting not only delivers return to the model, but it also has the happy consequence of accelerating the rate at which others hire out of our program. One of the really neat things we've been able to do in these difficult times of COVID-19 is last year, there was the moment when we all got sent home and there was here in California, a shelter-in-place order. We knew really quickly that so many around us would be faced with job loss, and that would lead to needs around childcare and food and on and on. And so we collaborated with about a dozen foundations around the country to, in 11 days, build the nation's largest rejobbing platform, Onward US. a Salesforce application that has been deployed now in 15 states and put thousands and thousands of people back to work by matching the non-technical, matching the life essential services, training opportunities, and available jobs during this difficult time. That took 700 people, all drawn from our workforce programs, to deliver in 11 days as an initiative that continues today. And so what you see there is not only are these folks able to enter the technology industry, but they're able to meet really pressing and urgent emergency needs when sort of technology is needed most. And so workforce training, that first piece, and technology consulting, the second. The third is how we root this work in place. We knew very quickly that if we just did the first two things I've described, sitting 200 miles from San Francisco and Los Angeles, it'd be easy to imagine producing talent that hemorrhages to a major market. And so really just producing programmers that move to San Francisco. And our goal was instead to produce folks that took jobs in Fresno, folks that became home buyers and taxpayers and the givers to nonprofits and folks who serve on boards, folks who are really helping to contribute to and grow Fresno was our aim. And so to do that, we knew that we needed to create community. And so we developed a model for acquiring blighted real estate or underutilized real estate at the center of our city, improving it and leasing it to ourselves and other tech and tech-enabled firms. We rooted our workforce programs right there in the center of those facilities. And what it did is it created really three extraordinary outcomes. For the student, you are walking into, from your very first night in class, this inspiring environment that you imagined in New York or Los Angeles and you assumed would never be for you or in your hometown. And you're experiencing community and belonging, professional opportunity and mentorship with the companies that are surrounding your classroom from that very first moment. And then on the other side of the coin, the technology tenants have ready access to talent that they've assumed historically was their primary blocker to growth in that geography. And so you see companies begin to grow in extraordinary ways and really, really exceptional outcomes. And then that activity of rejuvenating that building or set of buildings has the happy consequence of creating really rich vitality at the center of our city, engaging in revitalization. That work didn't begin glamorous either. I remember, so one of our earliest investors, John Dotson, we were getting going and we felt like we needed a building. And so we toured a number and we're just coming up empty-handed. It could have had something to do with the fact that we had no money, but we hadn't found a building. And so John says, hey, I have a building at the north end of downtown. I don't want to apply any pressure, but you should come and tour it. And I said, John, that would have been something nice to say a couple of months ago when you saw me touring buildings all over downtown. In any event, we go and we tour. I arrive at this building and it is unremarkable to say the least. And so John walks us in. John is not a natural salesperson, but he is putting on his very best song and dance, walking us around this building and saying, well, we can put this here and we can knock down this wall and change this thing. And we're trying to be polite, but we are just not at all convinced. And we get to the end of the tour and John says, so no pressure, but what do you think? Do you think you could see it here? And it's clear that John is excited. And so I sort of look back at John and I say, you know, hey, I'm really sorry, but I just can't imagine a programmer walking through those doors and voluntarily staying here. And he says, no, I know, I get it. It's rough. I just wanted to make this available and let you know as an option because, you know, you could have this building for free. And I said, John, this is the building. And that is of course, 5,000 square feet where we began. And the work really burgeoned, and that 5,000 square feet has grown here in Fresno alone to be 250,000 square feet, home to 200 technology companies and several thousand new technology jobs. Something that we know by virtue of external measuring has contributed to the macro economy of Fresno by growing its GDP by greater than 1% a year. So here we are so very much in the wilderness. We don't know anything about what venture capital is, and we have these blinders on, laser focused to doing this work in Fresno, but it's growing and it's starting to get attention. And so one of the questions that begins to come up is, well, have you ever considered doing this in other places? And the honest answer was no. We were just sort of like startled and surprised that it was working. So we start to entertain these questions coming up more and more here in our region. and we get curious of, well, have we come on something that could serve other people and places well? And so we began to dig in. Well, what kind of city can we serve well, and what would it look like to launch there? And that ultimately led to a conviction that there was this category of cities, we like to call them underestimated cities, that were like Fresno, just in their bones, in their grit, in their socioeconomics, in their hopes for a better future. And so that led to a California expansion strategy. And we selected Bakersfield, Merced, and West Oakland as the cities that we thought were best fitting for the work that we were doing. And so we began to work in those places. And we were excited to find that the work took root, and it began to get traction at a faster clip than we could ever anticipate. And that got us curious around, well, what would it look like to expand not just here in California, but around the country? Now, by this point, we had learned a bit about venture capital, which, you know, if you grow up in Silicon Valley and you start anything, your sort of step one is to decide sort of that you want to start something. Step two is to raise Boku venture capital, and step three is to decide what you're going to do. It's just insane. In Fresno, venture capital is something you assume is not for you, right? That exists in the Bay Area. So Irma and I, with the first expansion strategy here in California, we prepared these materials. We thought we were really slick. We prepared a 72-page hardbound deck that we took to Silicon Valley. We had a meeting with an investor, and we thought surely this investor is going to write this check in this meeting. He's looking sort of curiously at this 72-page bound book and saying, do you know how long decks ordinarily are? And we looked back and we said, well, what's a deck? And then he says, okay, so he starts flipping through and he says, so are you raising your Series A, which priced financings in venture capital are labeled A, B, C, and D? And we look at each other and we say, sure. And that's how we learned what a deck was and what a Series A was. And we failed for 18 months at raising any capital at all until we came on just the right investors. And then the success with that California expansion strategy led to some really exciting investors, a $50 million Series B investment led by JP Morgan Chase to take Bitwise around the country. The first of those cities that we selected was Toledo, Ohio. And over the course of the next 3 months, we'll select another 5 cities around the United States and are eagerly digging in there in Las Cruces and excited about everything that we're seeing. I want to say a bit about this idea of expanding into other cities. Being from Fresno, California, there's no shortage of people that have ridden in with these great ideas and said, we want to answer all of your questions. We're the singular solution. We know better than you, and then failed. They just have not followed through and really have demonstrated a lack of desire to work with things already going on. And so that's the sort of ethos that we, having lived through that and not wanting to be that, is the ethos that we've taken to this work. And so when we go to a community, what we're looking for is a city that already has really wonderful people and things going on that we can weave ourselves into. Bitwise is not a silver bullet solution. Bitwise is excellent at launching folks living in poverty into careers in technology, and that only matters when it's partnered with a great many other things in a community and when it's accepted as a local solution. And that brings us to a really other critical point. And Irma and I don't go to Toledo and Oakland to run and lead the Bitwise work. That work's led by Tammy Sherman, born and raised in Toledo. It's led by Kenan Scott, who was running technology education programs for Oakland Unified School District. Individuals who have in their bones that place, who have cultural, relational, political capital to lead the catalytic work of Bitwise in a new city. And so those are things that we're excited about and eagerly looking for in Las Cruces. And I have to say, I had a text message just before this, and Irma was really, really impressed with everything that she's seen in Las Cruces. And her words were, "This feels like home." Everything that I've experienced with John and others echoes that same sentiment. It feels a bit like Fresno. And so we're deeply excited about the opportunity to dig in, grateful for the opportunity to speak here today. But I want to come back to 2 things here before closing and hopefully opening up to questions. And that is, first, So much of what we're trying to do at Bitwise is to take what was accidental in my life and in Irma's life and in our family's stories and make it systemic in the cities we serve. And that is, I think above all, Bitwise is an exciting story. And would Bitwise in Las Cruces be exciting? We really think that it would. But I think extrapolating away is so important. I think Bitwise is and can be an example that we can and should design for better, more equitable, more prosperous futures in cities like Fresno and Toledo and Bakersfield and Las Cruces, no matter what the world tells us is possible. So deeply grateful for the opportunity to share, would welcome questions, and thank you for giving us the time.
Yeah, thank you, Jake. We really appreciate all the information. Very excited about what you're looking at here in Las Cruces, and congratulations to all your success that you've had as a company. We do want to open it up to some questions. I have a roaming mic, so raise your hand. I'll run to you. And Fernando, is that a question you're standing up for? Or? Oh, no, he's not. Okay, so any questions? I'll start with one, Jake, if you don't mind. You talked about the apprenticeship program and some of the other communities you're moving into, like Toledo, for example. So Toledo, my understanding, has about a population of 600,000 people. The Doña Ana County area here is about 200,000. Based on that population, do you have a formula for how many apprenticeship you expect to capture and drive through your program?
Yeah, so and the cities we serve vary widely. So the in terms of size, the most ready analogy would be Merced, California, about an hour north of Fresno, which was our second expansion city. Toledo, of course, is more similar in size to Fresno. And so every city, we lay out a set of projections for how many people we can serve. We can serve at the very top of funnel, a couple of basis points of that city's population, replenishing each year. And then the way that our program works, it begins with self-evaluation. I think maybe we didn't say here, but it's important to point out, the cost of the program is entirely free to students. We shifted away to government, philanthropic, corporate funders, and also revenue generating activities. And we begin with self-evaluation. That's an opportunity for somebody to enter the program and get acquainted with the things of the technology industry. If you imagine somebody coming out of field, factory, restaurant, or retail work, they are unlikely to have woken up today thinking about, well, how am I going to get into technology? So we want to introduce them to the basic idea of what technology careers look like. Then from there, they tell us, they opt into or not our pre-apprenticeship program, 6-week stackable modules. From there, about half will make their way to apprenticeship, where they're paid to learn, fully benefited, full-time employment, where they're attaching to junior level tasks on work coming through our Bitwise consulting shop. So the number of apprentices is dependent upon how many people come through the top of the funnel. And we expect to begin by training a couple of dozen in year one and get up to the point where we're training well more than 100 apprentices each year in Las Cruces based on its population size.
Great, thank you. Questions? Oh, there we go. Michael, just state your name and.
Hi, Jake. My name's Michael Martinez. I'm actually a city manager for Sunland Park, which is about 34 miles away from Las Cruces, but we're part of the region. And so I was curious, our population is only about 18,000 people, but we're considered part of the Las Cruces Metroplex. And so as a part of that, have you ever looked like mentoring smaller communities at that level to do outreach outside of just the larger community? So I'm assuming Fresno has several outlying communities that would try and participate, or do you have like a mentoring program for those small cities to try and build up to what you see the formula for Bitwise working with?
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually, there are strong similarities in Fresno, and it actually cuts across lines of equity as well. So Fresno is a city that has about 600,000. I think it's actually up to 750,000 or so people in its metropolitan. In its city limits. But then our county is widely distributed with the poorest in rural towns at the edges, much smaller than even what you've described, and they're 40 and 50 miles away. Lack access to reliable internet, lack access to clean drinking water. So we're talking about really deep and systemic poverty. That's the community that Irma comes from, and a town of 2,000 people at the western half of Fresno County. And so that was very much in our heart. And so we view the approach here as regional. And so you heard me describe the work around acquiring vans. Today in every city we're in, we have vans that run circulars around the region, picking up students to bring them back. We're actively teaching and recruiting in rural communities that sit at the edges of the metropolitan regions that we serve. We view those cities and smaller towns as deeply important to the work that we're doing, and we know that many of the folks that we train are going to be from those places. They're going to desire to acquire these skills, earn jobs, and continue to live in their hometowns. And we work with each of those cities too in many other ways. We're a part of a national consortium that brings broadband access to rural communities and ensures that the installation of that, the jobs that come with it, go to folks in those communities, and then that they have access to higher skills training with things like Bitwise. And so we would be eager to work with you there in Las Cruces and view you very much a part of the work.
Thank you. Other questions? There we go.
My name is Daniel Torres. So I know you guys are across 14 different cities, and each community has its own different set of hurdles. But what do you think has been one of the most challenging things that you guys have found from each individual city that you've been a part of?
Yeah, I think that the most challenging thing is that is often in cities, right? Those who are underserved don't have a seat at the table. Meaning we're not asking the poor Black community on the east side of the river to weigh in on the solution. We're not asking the Native community what it thinks of the solution. And so really communicating to the business community, to the world at large, that Bitwise only works if we're building relationships of trust and stakeholder relationships with historically disenfranchised communities. And so that's a non-traditional view, non-obvious activity for a venture-backed technology company. And we do that by empowering people from those communities. We're going to Toledo, say, if we want to teach Black folks from the east side of the river to become computer programmers, the person in the front of the room ought to be a Black programmer who can empathize with the work going on, the work that and struggle that those individuals are coming from. If we want to reach Native populations, we ought to be able to put an Indigenous person at the front of the room who can identify with the student experience. And so that is something that we're deeply committed to. The exercise of doing that as Bitwise is not difficult. The exercise of communicating that to the broader community as an essential seat at the table can sometimes be sort of a culture change. And so that is just something that we are deeply committed to and is core to the work that we do.
All right, thank you. More questions. There we go. Counselor.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Yvonne Flores. I'm a city councilor here in Las Cruces, but I did a lot of work in the San Joaquin Valley with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta back in the 70s.
Dolores is a friend.
Yeah, she's a dear friend of ours. She's from New Mexico.
Yeah.
But and I'm very familiar with the San Joaquin. And my son is named Joaquin just for the San Joaquin Valley.
Oh, wonderful.
Absolutely. But so it's all what you're saying is almost like a dream come true. I know for Commissioner Reynolds, who's sitting next to me, County Commissioner, because we ran for public office so that we can address the very same issues that you're addressing in terms of people who have been disenfranchised, people who are always on the outside looking in. Even when we talk about equity, you're still on the outside looking in.
Yeah.
So in terms of this being successful here in our community, everything you said sounds like it would be a good blueprint for us. but I want to know how much it would cost us, how long it would take to implement, how long did it take you to see the turnaround and to see kids, because I too ended up going to law school and it was happenstance, just very similar to Irma's story, where you just run into someone and says you can do it. And it was another Chicano as we were going from the Museum of Science and Industry and walking across the street to USC. And then so I took classes at USC and left as fast as I could go because it was not my cup of tea. But the point though is that it does take someone who's been there to really instill faith in someone who's been on the outside. And after all these, well, 200, 300, 400 years here, we have people still feeling very disenfranchised. So going back to my question, how much is it going to cost us, the city and the county, and of course Sunland Park and our other communities? We have villages here and townships, Mesilla, Hatch, for example. How would we make sure, or how would you implement it here? How long would it take? How much would it cost? How much would it take to get everything going? And how long does it take to see some the outcomes and results? Thank you.
Yeah, I like that, cutting right to the chase. And I love the connectivity with the San Joaquin Valley. And I will share, my family actually is from New Mexico on my mother's side. My great-great-grandfather was the state game warden of New Mexico. His name is Elliot Barker. And so the question is a good one, and it has multiple different facets. The way that we think about going to a city is by demonstrating two things: relational readiness. That is, when we share with a room like you all of stakeholders the story of Bitwise, do you all look back across the table and say that is something we want to be a part of our city's story? Because it's possible that the answer is no, and that's okay too. And we've been really excited about the warm reception we've received in every conversation, including here. And so looking to do that at every level of the community. The second piece of the puzzle is what we call commercial readiness. And that is where we are looking to aggregate $5 million in commercial opportunity to bring Bitwise to the city. And that isn't a check here, Bitwise come to the city for this amount. Rather, it is the core activities, value generating activities that Bitwise does, making sure that we can attach to the right partners in that community. And so what that looks like is equity investment. You heard John hint at that, into Bitwise. It could be government or philanthropic partnerships. In this moment, quite a lot of that is tied to both ARPA and infrastructure dollars, also CARES dollars, but we work really closely with government partners and philanthropic partners to be able to provide value, whether it is in the broadband access space, the technology delivery space, or the workforce training space. And so happy to dig in further there. And then the last category is actual service contracts, winning business there locally to deliver technology solutions to folks in the region. And so we look to aggregate that, and that is something, of course, we look to grow over time. But really, really importantly, that is something where we believe we're going to provide value in turn, yes, but also what we have seen is that in every community that we have entered, we have in turn invested over, or are tracking to invest over, $50 million in that community over the course of our first 3 years. And in many cases, it's tracking closer to $100 million. And that's by bringing national dollars back, building teams in Las Cruces that are doing the world's technology consulting work. And so that's that piece of your question. As it relates to timing, I will say that we're very near the finish line in Las Cruces. We have been digging in and doing the work, and so many there on the ground have been supporting that. And so the hope would actually be to arrive at a final decision on going or not going to Las Cruces here in the third quarter, announce in the fourth quarter, and have activities in every category of the business up and running by the first quarter of 2022. And student outcomes. Students come to us at all different levels, but usually take between 6 and 18 months to complete their program and enter industry. We would, of course, make lateral hires in the interim, and there would be apprentices that are at the final stage of our program as early as the second quarter of 2022.
Thank you, Jake. We have time for one more question. We are up against the hour, but give it to you.
Hey, thanks, Jake. My name is Marco. I guess kind of thinking of it as a parent standpoint and for the community, and maybe you touched on it a little bit and I didn't hear it, but for the selection process of your apprenticeship program, can you go in depth of what goes into that? Is it a board? Is it a lottery? You know, what goes into the selection for those apprenticeships? And I think you said about, for our population here for 200,000, about 100 people a year. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So even more. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I guess 100 people per 200,000 seems kind of small. You know, there's a lot of students, we have the community college, we got the university. So I guess I'm curious to know what the selection process is to be selected for the Bitwise program. Yeah,
it's a good question. And importantly, 100 is something that is a part of our ramp. We expect to get well past that there in Las Cruces. And so beginning point in the couple of dozen in year one, and then you get up over 100 very quickly. And in cities of similar size today, we're running well more than 200 folks through the apprenticeship program. And so it really is something that we expect to grow over time. Really critically, and I keep going back to the full sequence because I think it's important, there are no barriers to entry in our self-evaluation program. There's no selection process. All you have to do is show up and engage with the things that we're teaching, and then you opt into or out of our pre-apprenticeship program. To make it into our pre-apprenticeship program, it is your decision. You have to be able to read, write, and speak at a junior high school level in today, English, Spanish, or Hmong, which is a dialect of Vietnamese that's very prevalent in the communities that we serve. You have to be able to check your email in a web browser, type, and divide by 3. And we can remediate anything that is missing. Once you do that, you enter into our pre-apprenticeship program, which are stackable 6-week modules that you're using to track towards whatever your interest area is in technology. 80% of those students will earn technical employment. 50% will do it. Will exit. Let me back up. 80% will earn technical employment. 30% will exit from pre-apprenticeship straight to employment, and 50% will exit to apprenticeship and then to a job. We think of our apprenticeship a little bit differently than most folks. It's not simply reserved for the cream of the crop and the very best performers. It's who needs this last leg of the journey in order to be readied for the technology industry. Because if you're ready to earn employment out of the pre-apprenticeship program, we don't want to be another barrier for you. Exit to employment as soon as possible. And so we have an internal student success team that's responsible for inviting folks into the apprenticeship program. And though not in every cycle, it is seldom that if somebody has an interest in entering the apprenticeship program, they wouldn't at some point have the opportunity to do that.
Jake, thank you for your time today.
Thank you guys so much.
It's great information. We hope the rest of your team's visit goes well here and that you strongly consider Las Cruces as a future home for Bitwise. Normally we have our speaker draw some cards for a raffle we have. I'm gonna allow John to be your arm and hand there and select a winner. It must have been how the card felt, right? So, but in all respects, so a gift certificate to Lorenzo's, please enjoy. So, again, Jake, thank you, and everyone in the room. We appreciate you joining us today. I thought it was great information. And as for now, we are still planning a luncheon for October, barring any news that we can't. So, put us on the calendar, keep us on the radar. We'll get some information out on who the speaker will be in the near future. So thank you very much.